For nearly 1,000 years, the rhythm of Europe never changed. You woke up with the sun, you worked the land of your ancestors. The fastest thing you ever saw was a galloping horse. Your world was quiet, green, and predictable. Think about a person born in 1850. They lived a life that was more similar to ours today than it was to their own grandfathers. In just a few decades, the silence of the countryside was shattered by the scream of locomotion. The sky turned black with the soot of 1,000 chimneys. This wasn't just a change in technology, it was a total rewiring of the human experience. We're talking about the birth of the weekend, the invention of the middle class, and a world where time was no longer measured by the seasons, but by the relentless ticking of a factory clock. Today, we are diving into AP European History, Unit 6, Industrialization and Its Effects. From the glass walls of the Crystal Palace to the dark depths of the coal mines, we are looking at how Europe traded its soul for steel and how it changed the balance of power forever. Thanks for being here. I am Wendy, the host of AP History Help. I hope that your new year is starting out great. As a gentle reminder, that AP exam is now less than 4 months away. And while I know you still have much content to learn, you really should be reviewing weekly as you look toward that exam. I do have a couple of courses on OutSchool that can help you. One is a self-paced course that looks specifically at the skills needed to succeed in an AP history class. The other is a live, in-person, on Zoom class on writing the DBQ essay, which, spoiler alert, is similar to writing the LEQ, and I'll address that during the course. I'll put the links to those in the show notes in case you want to check them out. If you're new to OutSchool, the classes are likely going to be like half off if you take advantage of their first month free offer. They're always running specials, so the new people get a really good deal. Come on in, students, and take your seats. Welcome back to another session of AP History Help. I'm your host, Wendy, and today we're tackling one of the most transformative periods in human history. Make sure to grab those notebooks. There is a lot to take notes on today. We are diving into Unit 6 of AP European History called Industrialization and Its Effects. The time period we're looking at is roughly 1850 to 1914. Now, if you've been following along, you know this season is content heavy. If you want to keep your notes organized thematically, which is my top recommendation, make sure you grab a copy of my Student Success Planner. You can find it on Amazon or through my website at aphistoryhelp.com. Links to both of those are in the show notes. So Unit 6 represents about 10 to 15% of the AP exam. This unit is all about the shift from an agricultural economy to an industrial one, and how that shift fundamentally rewired society, politics, and the daily lives of every European. To put this in context, the Great Shift didn't happen overnight. It was rooted in the agricultural revolution, which increased food production and led to population growth. This created a surplus labor force. Basically, fewer people were needed to farm, so more people were available to work in factories. But why did it start in Great Britain? This is a classic AP history question. Britain had the perfect storm of factors. First, they had geography, an abundant supply of coal and iron ore, plus being an island meant great ports and canals for transport. They also had capital. Wealth from the commercial revolution and colonization was available for investment. They also had a strong central bank, the Bank of England, which provided credit. And they had political stability. Unlike the rest of the continent, which was dealing with the Napoleonic Wars, Britain's parliamentary government promoted commercial interests and protected private property. By 1851, Britain was the workshop of the world. They even threw a massive party to show off the Great Exhibition at the Crystal Palace. If you see the Crystal Palace on your exam, think British industrial superiority. Industrialization eventually spread to the continent, but it looked different there. In France, it was more gradual, with heavy government support. In the German states, things really took off after 1850. One key term you must know here is the Zollverein. This was a German customs union that removed internal tariffs, which promoted trade and helped unify the German states economically long before they unified politically. However, don't forget the regions that lagged behind, specifically Southern and Eastern Europe. Geography, lack of resources, and the persistence of serfdom in Russia meant they stayed agricultural for much longer, which created a massive economic gap between Western and Eastern Europe. Then, around 1870, we hit the Second Industrial Revolution. The first wave was about textiles, iron, and steam. The second wave was about steel, chemicals, electricity, and oil. The Bessemer process made steel stronger and cheaper, leading to skyscrapers and massive navies. We also see the telegraph, the telephone, and the radio shrinking the world, while the internal combustion engine paved the way for automobiles and airplanes. Now, let's look at the effects part of the unit title. This is where the themes of social organization really come into play. The most obvious effect was urbanization. People flooded into cities like Manchester, England, but these cities weren't ready for them. We're talking about massive overcrowding, crime, and deadly outbreaks of cholera due to poor sanitation. We also see the rise of new class structures. This is social. This is important. The bourgeoisie was the new factory-owning middle class. They valued hard work and a very specific family model called the cult of domesticity, which idealized women as moral managers of the home. The proletariat was the industrial working class. For them, the cult of domesticity was an impossible dream because women and children had to work in factories and mines just to survive. Time for our episode 54 fun fact. We've been talking about the crime and the chaos that came with rapid urbanization, but did you know the word Bobby, the nickname for a British police officer, is actually a tribute to a major industrial reformer? Before the 1820s, cities like London didn't have a professional organized police force. If you were mugged, you basically had to catch the criminal yourself or pay a thief-taker to do it for you. As industrial cities exploded in size, crime became a massive public crisis. Enter Sir Robert Peel. In 1829, he established the Metropolitan Police Force, the first modern police force in the world. But here's the catch. The public, they hated the idea at first. They thought a police force was a sign of government tyranny. To make them look less like a military occupation, Peel gave them blue uniforms because the British Army often wore red, and he famously insisted they remain unarmed, carrying only a wooden stick, a wooden truncheon. Because the force was Bobby Peel's creation, the public started calling them Bobbies, and sometimes Peelers. Bobbies stuck. This is the perfect example of an institutional response to the social dislocations of the 19th century. So next time you hear that term, remember, it's a direct result of the Industrial Revolution, trying to keep the peace. All right, back to the pod. After the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, European leaders met at the Congress of Vienna to put the world back together, which brings us to the next topic, which is the concert of Europe and conservatism. Now, Clemens von Metternich, the Austrian foreign minister, was the architect of this system. His goal was to maintain the status quo, which meant tradition, monarchy, and the church. He hated the ideas of the French Revolution, and he used the concert system to intervene and crush revolutions wherever they popped up. But the industrial world was changing too fast for Metternich to hold it back. We see the rise of competing ideologies. Wait, before we go there, have you listened to episode 51? It came out in early December, and it's a deep dive into the isms. I'm about to touch on 3 of them, but that episode goes much further in depth. There is even a song that I would love to take credit for, but AI helped me write it. But I did make a cool lyric video for it, though, which you can find on YouTube. I'll put the link in the bio. Lots of those today. Back to those competing ideologies. Liberalism emphasized individual rights and written constitutions. Think John Stuart Mill, who advocated for women's rights. Nationalism, the belief that people with a common language and culture should have their own state. This was a massive threat to multi-ethnic empires like Austria. And socialism. Utopian socialists like Robert Owen wanted cooperative communities, and later Karl Marx developed scientific socialism or Marxism, arguing that a revolution of the proletariat was inevitable to overthrow capitalism. Now, these tensions exploded in the revolutions of 1848, triggered by economic hardship and political discontent. These revolts eventually failed to create lasting change, but they did lead to the breakdown of Metternich's Concert of Europe. As the 19th century progressed, the problems of industrialization became too big to ignore. This leads us to social reform and institutional responses. Governments finally began to step away from pure laissez-faire economics and started intervening. We see landmarks like the Factory Act of 1833, which limited child labor, the Mines Act of 1842, which prohibited women and children from working underground, and the 10 Hours Act of 1847, which limited the workday for women and children. We also see urban reform. In Paris, Georges Haussmann completely rebuilt the city with wide boulevards, parks, and sewage systems. This wasn't just for beauty. The wide streets made it harder for revolutionaries to build barricades. We also see the first modern police forces, like the Bobbies in London, and the rise of compulsory education to create skilled and nationalist workforce. And let's not forget the feminist movement. We touched on this in the last episode, which was all about women and how they broke barriers in history. But let's talk about it in the context of the Industrial Revolution in Europe. So women like Flora Tristan and later Emmeline Pankhurst fought for legal and political rights, with Pankhurst's WSPU using more militant tactics to demand the right to vote. Why does this all matter for your exam? It doesn't. I'm kidding. Because Unit 6 is the ultimate study in causation. Industrialization was the engine that drove every other change in the 19th century. It created new class structures. It led to mass politics. It forced conservatives to adapt. And it completely altered the balance of power in Europe, especially with the rise of a unified industrial Germany. If you get a DBQ or an LEQ on this unit, look for those connections between technology and social change. How did the steam engine lead to the middle class cult of domesticity? How did the telegraph lead to a more intense global competition? If you want more details, I have a self-paced AP European history course available on OutSchool. Remember to check out that DBQ class that starts on February 11th over Zoom, as well as my daily social media posts on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts. You know what I'm going to say. I've said it a lot this episode. Link in bio. Next episode, as I mentioned before, is a deep dive into the importance of trade in history and how it applies to all 3 history courses. Then we'll move into Unit 7, where we see how these industrial and nationalistic forces lead us toward the First World War. In the meantime, keep reviewing, keep practicing, and remember, if you haven't already, you better start studying for that AP History exam. And with that, this episode of the AP History Help podcast is now history.